We are 23 million strong.
From big cities to rural towns, classrooms to kitchens,
Hospitals to boardrooms.
for too long, our stories have been erased,
We've been fetishized,
othered,
scapegoated.
murdered.
We will always speak out against violence and discrimination wherever it occurs.
That's why the Asian American Foundation has come together.
We will serve 23 million Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders
and support
Asian American leaders
who know how to make change.
Our story is America's story. The Asian American Foundation.
Hi, everyone. I'm Amna Nawaz. I'm the chief correspondent and substitute anchor at the PBS NewsHour, and I am so happy to be here today with the Asian American Foundation and with NextShark to mark the historic launch of a new effort to build a national movement to combat anti-AAPI hate and to create a more connected sense of belonging for AAPIs across the country. Now, as many of you know, the Asian American Foundation launched in May. That was to help serve AAPI communities in their pursuit of belonging and prosperity, free from discrimination and slander and violence. Now, the Asian American Foundation wants to help build the necessary infrastructure to tackle and to prevent hate incidents on the ground where they are happening, which is why they're piloting AAPI Action Centers in cities across America to serve as hubs for addressing that anti-AAPI hate locally. So with us today to talk about more on that mission, how it works, what's ahead, all of the important stuff, we have an incredible lineup of leaders that really reflect this coalition that's being built towards this effort. We have leaders from government and media and community. First with us is New York Congresswoman Grace Meng. Congresswoman, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be with all of you.
Thanks for being here. We also have the founder and CEO of NextShark, Benny Liu. Benny, how are you?
Good. Thank you so much for having me.
Also with us is Joanne Yu. She's the executive director of the Asian American Federation. Joanne, how are you?
Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm well.
And with us is Tu Quach. She's the incoming president of Oakland's Asian Health Services. How are you? Thanks for being here.
I'm good, and good morning from Oakland, California.
And of course, with us is Sonal Shah. She is president of the Asian American Foundation. Sonal, how are you?
It's great to be here, Amna. Great to be with this great team here.
Joanne and Tu, I'd love to come to you on this because your organizations have been, you've been in the communities, you've been working on the ground for years and years and years. And I'm curious, when you look back at this time, you know what your communities have and what they need. And so I'm wondering, when you look back, what specific things did you not have that you know you would have needed to be able to better serve your communities? Joanne, I'll start with you.
Oh, that's a big question. What we didn't have, and what I think we still struggle with to some extent, is visibility. I think every Asian agrees when we still see certain forms that we check off, white, Black, Latino, and other. And I'm assuming that the other is us. We are invisible, and oftentimes, and we are always, because we all get the question, where are you from? Where are you really from? So I don't know why, and it's always an assumption that we are from elsewhere, that we are not Americans. And I think that's something that we worked with. So it was certainly visibility. It was certainly lack of resources. Our community isn't just, speaks one language. We're not all from the same country. So there's incredible diversity, and that strength, that diversity is our strength. But oftentimes that diversity makes it really hard for us to convene and get together and to be able to advocate for the things that we need. And so from a place where we have been, we've always been at a place of constant need, constant lack of resources. And so when something like this happens, we really didn't have a lot of financial resources. We really didn't have, enough systems in place to be able to address a lot of what was happening. And I don't want to just say that for the Asian American community, because I think some of what we saw during the pandemic really happened to all communities, particularly Black and brown communities. And so it is the lack of preparedness, but for our community, it's the lack of visibility that really was a challenge.
Sue, what about you? Lack of visibility, was that a problem for you as well?
Yeah, I would say definitely. And looking through a health lens, I would say that we've always seen that violence and racism are public health issues. And that's why Asian Health Services is really getting involved in this. I look back and say that when COVID hit, our Asian American communities were both simultaneously blamed and deliberately ignored, whether it's what Joanne had said around, lack of data, lack of visibility, but sort of all of the narrative around us causing this virus, and at the same time, not being given the resources that we need to serve our community. During this time for Asian Health Services, we knew that providing care and services are in itself acts of activism and advocacy because there was just nothing around. We had to fight for our communities to be seen and heard and to be served. I mean, it was some of the most frustrating points, sitting there and feeling like we were completely either missing from that narrative, or when we were mentioned, we were the cause of this virus, which is ridiculous. So we want to say that while we've been ground zero in COVID and in the attacks, we also endeavor to be ground zero in building solidarity and strategies to turn the tides on the pandemic and on the hate. And we recognize that committing to addressing community safety, we must also tackle the long-term and complex challenge of racial unity. I think that that's going to be really challenging during this period. And again, looking through a health lens, what's been really sobering for us with the infectious COVID virus is that we're all really connected, that our health is only as good as that of our neighbors, and that our safety, when it comes to our safety, we're all connected in so many ways, and we really do need to find ways to work together. We're glad to say that we're not in the struggle alone, that we've been working in partnerships with our nonprofit, our government, our philanthropic, and our corporate partners. And so this is an exciting time for us, but really looking back, it really was feeling both blamed and ignored and feeling very invisible in all of this work.
Sonal, I'd love for you to respond to what we just heard from Joanne and Sue, because these are organizations that have been deeply embedded and deeply familiar with the community for years. TAAF is now 5 months old, 6 months old. So I'm curious, how can TAAF help to meet those needs they just articulated?
Yeah, I'm listening to and Joanne, and really, this is also a lot of the stuff that we had heard on the campaign from the Asian American communities of feeling invisible and not getting the resources that were needed in the communities. And then obviously the pandemic didn't help. So that is exactly why TAAF exists, right? Is recognizing that there are communities on the ground, like what Asian Health Services and TAAF are doing, as well as what Joanne and the Asian American Federation are doing, that have been in communities for a very long time. And really the question is, how do we take what is happening at the very local levels, where they are meeting the community where they are and providing the services, and connecting them to the national story about what's happening, what resources are needed, what more do we need to make sure, translation services, access to health, what are the things that are needed to make sure that they're getting them, and connecting those dots. And that's exactly why we started. And that's also why we're doing the AAPI Action Centers, is we know that the local and the national need to be connected. And too often we ignore the communities on the ground and we create national policies. But here we wanted to make sure we sat in the middle of helping connect those dots, because we need to give those like Tu and Joanne that are working the access to the information and to the resources that they need. But their voice also needs to be heard at the national level, and that's something that we know is important.
Congresswoman, you know a little something about connecting the local with the national and trying to coordinate responses and support. And it took leaders like you and other AAPI leaders galvanizing support, bringing leaders together at the national table and saying, this is something we need to address. This is something that's going to take a coordinated response. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about how that coordination comes together and how you think that works with an organization like TAAF in partnership with these local organizations across the country.
Yeah, thank you for this really important question. And this is exactly what I mean when I say, although our community has suffered so much trauma over the past 18 months, this is how we will grow and become more effective. And that's why I'm incredibly grateful for organizations like TAAF, because organizations like TAAF are long overdue for our community. We have over 23 million AAPIs that live across the country, all across different sectors. Strategic enough. We don't have a unified network, and organizations like TAAF, and I want to thank Sonal and your whole board and all the volunteers, because you have helped us thread that, bringing together the different sectors from the business world to academia to philanthropic and to our elected officials in government. And that's exactly what we need. Our organizations are truly the heartbeat of our community. TAAF is there supporting our organizations like Tu and Joanne's groups because government hasn't been there. Government has not provided equitable resources and energy to our communities and to groups who are on the ground. And so it's really important that we are able to have that strategy, because the truth is, what inequalities we saw come out and manifested during COVID were not new for our community. If you ask Joanne what was happening on the ground during normal times, those inequities already existed. And then when COVID arrived, we saw how that continued to be exacerbated on the effects of our community. Discrimination and racism isn't only in the form of physical and violent attacks. When our community doesn't get the same resources as everyone else, that's a form of discrimination too. So when we first started seeing COVID, even before, like Joanne said, I had constituents who didn't speak English in the Asian community that didn't even know we were on lockdown, right? Because the government wasn't providing enough information and multilingual resources. And many of us, you all know, like Joanne fights for this every day, had to go out and bring the information in appropriate languages to our community. Then COVID hit. Our districts were with large Asian populations, were the last to get testing, were the last to get vaccines. And we had to depend on organizations like Tu and Joanne's to be on the ground, to do the work that government should have been doing. And yet we still were able to come through. And it's because of the support of organizations like TAAF that we were able to help our community. And their support of our local organizations helps us get the word out and literally helps us save lives and protect our community.
When you talk about getting the word out, that brings me perfectly to Benny. Benny, I want to ask you from the media's standpoint, especially one that's so deeply connected and committed to underreported communities, underrepresented communities, especially on the national level. I'm curious what you would need from a group like TAAF. What resources, what support, what helps you to better do your job, and also how that partnership you think can better support local organizations who often struggle to, respond to media, work with media, especially in times of crises like we saw during the surge of violence.
It's interesting that you mentioned that. I think that, as like NextShark is one of the leading publications for Asian Americans, a lot of we reach up to 15 million people a week on social media at some points, and our readership is very diverse. I mean, we have readers as young as middle school, 13, reading our stuff, and it's quite interesting because as Grace mentioned, I mean, a lot of these inequities and issues surrounding Asian Americans are not new, and that's why these organizations exist, like the Asian American Foundation and Asian Health Services, right? But oftentimes, because a lot of these grassroots organizations, even though they've been around for a long time, because they've been so busy and under-resourced on the ground floor doing the work, they haven't had the time to market what they're doing and really kind of get the word out. And in a sense, that sort of invisibility is sometimes it is really real, because unless we have our own mediums to kind of get the word out, I mean, it's very, very difficult. And so even during the pandemic, I saw a lot of messages that we got were like, A, like, how can I help? Or two, how can I get help? And that process of NextShark being that sort of like sounding board for a lot of these organizations came off as quite organic because, we had so many people wanting to either get involved or they were looking for resources. And, suddenly we were kind of put in this position where it's like, okay, well, we kind of have to, what can we do to give back to the community? And so for us, some of the things that we did was, amplifying, campaigns. I think that, we did a campaign for the Asian American Foundation, where we used our Instagram to like, kind of, raise funding for a lot of it, for, some of their initiatives. We would create like, guides online that we would disperse out to our following in a very easily shareable manner. And I think that overall, I mean, I can't, NextShark can't take full credit for all of the things that they've done. We very much like, credit the community for, being loud, being vocal, and and messaging us, letting us know like what's going on in their respective communities. And in regards to TAAF, I mean, I think that I'm extremely grateful that TAAF was formed. I think that, this is something that, that we've needed for a long time. I think that, for us very much, I mean, we just, I think I speak for everybody when I say we just need more like resources. We need more support in, so many different areas in order for us to, kind of move forward. And, obviously, funding and resources helps a lot. It's something that I think it's very common amongst like, anyone that has done this type of work, especially for so long. And, but, overall, I'm very grateful. I'm very excited to, continue, working with organizations at Joanne and Two Runs and in tandem with TAAF as things go on.
Sonal, I have to ask, if you kind of listening to everyone share their experiences and the challenges that still exist, obviously, and it does feel, especially to someone who has both the lived experience and the experience professionally covering this community, it feels like there's an inflection point sort of for AAPIs right now. You have historic representation, historic sort of collaboration and resources coming together with an ambitious agenda that you and your fellow TAAF members and leaders have coordinated. But it does feel like that coordination, that collaboration is a crucial part of the mission, right? Nothing happens alone when you're talking about moving forward. So I'm just curious from your perspective, what models you're looking at, where you have seen this kind of effort work before that you're drawing upon that says to you, this is how it's going to work with TAAF and these organizations?
Yeah, that's a great question and a hard question, to be fair. Even if you just take a subcommittee, it's hard to sort of create coordination. So here we're looking at the broad AAPI community and 23 million, which I think is so important to remember. But just one quick thing to add on to the conversation here, it wasn't just the government that hasn't been delivering. Foundations also haven't been delivering for Asian American communities. Only 0.5% of resources of foundations actually go to AAPI communities. So what's important in this conversation is how much every single one of these communities, whether you're talking about Vietnamese American, Chinese American, Indian American, Pakistani American, every one of them has been under-resourced because so little resources go to these communities. And what's amazing is how much they have been delivering for their communities on a daily basis. So what Asian Health Services is doing, what Joanne is doing, it's important to recognize that. So I think what we have the ability to do and what TAAF has the ability to do is start linking different programs together. It's why we're investing in Asian Health Services. It's why we're investing in Asian American Federation. These are not two organizations that are connected to each other all the time. But if we take what's happening on the ground and we start creating a national network to say, hey, what are you all learning from each other? What's happening in New York? What's happening in Chicago? What's happening in Oakland? That we can learn from each other, that's a real opportunity. It's something that I saw when I was in government in the Obama administration. It's something that I know we saw in, like Bloomberg Philanthropies does this when they create Bloomberg cities and climate cities in different places. Now, all of these communities are slightly different. So our job is to make sure we're in the middle, ensuring that people are talking to each other, ensuring we know where the differences are and what we need to learn from the differences, but also what are the commonalities and how do we also talk about the commonalities? It's too easy to sweep everything else under the rug and saying, let's just talk about commonalities. It's also important that we recognize where the differences are and making sure we recognize the diversity of experience and diversity of organizations and meet the communities where they are, not try to make them what they're not. So that's something that we have been watching. I know government has done this in certain places, at least places where I've worked. I remember working with the national service programs in the Obama administration, and how national service works in so many diverse communities, but people have a common experience of national service, whether you're an AmeriCorps fellow or a VISTA fellow, you can create these opportunities. And that's, I think, what we're looking at TAAF, is making sure we take the local organizations, connect them to the national organizations, connect them to government, connect them to different places where the voices are being heard, and the Asian American community is not invisible. We have to make sure we're making our communities visible, and we have to make sure that at the multiple tables they should be at.
We've spoken so much about the challenges that have led us where we are and the challenges ahead. I'd love to go around to each and every one of you, if you don't mind, and just ask you about your hope for the future. What is it that you see on the ground and in the work that you do that tells you all of these changes are possible? And Joanne, I'm sorry to put the toughest question to you at the end first, but if you don't mind kicking us off, what is it in the work that you do and what you see that gives you hope about this change everyone's working towards in the community?
What gives me hope is that our community is coming together to put resources to increase our visibility and to meet the community exactly what Sonal said, where we are. And we realize that our work together isn't just to tackle anti-Asian racism, but to tackle this thing called racism in general. And then, I look at this panel, right? And I think this is what brings me hope. We have elected leaders who are leading and changing the laws and changing the perceptions of Asian Americans as the ones who change the laws and demonstrates great leadership. We have, that translates to policies where Tu and I have to work on the policies together to build from the bottom. We have Sonal funding us, and then we have Benny telling our stories. This is the base, and I think we need to continue to have this become a ripple effect so that way, not just our community to succeed. I mean, during all of the anti-Asian racism, I have been saying over and over again, the solution to anti-Asianism and racism isn't just to help Asians. I think we need to be able to work together with other communities to really solve the challenges that we are seeing in our society. And so I am always hopeful. There are days when it's really tough to get out of bed, but I'm always hopeful that we continue to move forward, that we continue to build on the progress that we have made. It's going to take many years. It's going to take many steps, but we need to start somewhere. And I'm really grateful for the leadership we have right up here on this panel.
Tu, over to you next. It's been just in health services, just alone in health services, just an incredibly difficult year. We're not through the worst of it yet, I think some would say. What is it that gives you hope? What gets you out of bed in the morning, as Joanne said?
I think Joanne hit it right on the head when she said there are days when it was really hard to get out of bed. And I just felt so fortunate to have worked with such incredible heroes. The healthcare workers, I mean, we were on the front lines every single day, making sure that we can deliver services in every way possible. When they wouldn't give us resources, we pushed to get testing out there because we knew our communities were not being tested. And that's why the numbers of COVIDs were not showing up. We pushed for contact tracing, we pushed for vaccinations, and we were still delivering all the other care. Mental health was, something that was really needed. And, I was just so moved by the incredible courage of our staff. And across all different ages, people were stepping up when they heard that our elders were being attacked. They were escorting communities and our staff to safety. It just gave me the chills to think about what was happening on the ground and in the trenches before the policies could come through. We needed to work together to protect ourselves and to ensure that our communities could thrive. And so looking ahead, I think what gives me so much hope is that this work is going to transcend so many borders, geographic, generational, across sectors, and even across the racial boundaries. And that I think that, just similar to what Joanne said, this work is more than just for our Asian American communities. It really is about our shared humanity in all of this.
Benny, what about you? I know, especially in the news business, it's very easy to get very cynical very quickly. How do you keep your hope up?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you some quick context. I mean, we've been covering, anti-Asian hate crimes pretty regularly, ever since the start of the pandemic. It's been like probably over a year and a half now, and this was something that's been on the daily, and very often, I mean, and as journalists yourself, I mean, when we're sourcing stories and we're verifying them and everything, oftentimes like we're subject to having to view a lot of distressing footage, and this is like every day for a year and a half, and it definitely takes like a mental toll on ourselves. But what gives me hope, I mean, come on, I look around me and I see like all the incredible people that I've met like this past year, all the incredible people from various industries, whether it's politics like Grace, to all these organizations that you guys run, that are just kind of like coming together and just collaborating. I mean, historically speaking, I mean, for lack of a better word, I don't think that Asian Americans have really done a good job in collaborating with each other. And this is but I feel like in this past year, for the first time in a while, and I actually the first time and ever since I've got into this whole business, that I saw so much collaboration, and just so much everybody just trying to show up for each other, right? So I see that at a high level, right? But on top of that, just looking at our readership, I mean, a lot of our NextShark's readership is young, and I'm very, very hopeful for the next generation. I mean, aside from the work that people are doing, as an organization nationally or whatever, I mean, I see like so many young people contributing in their own way. I mean, one of my favorite stories is a middle schooler in the Bay Area. Her name is Ashlyn So. I mean, during the start of the pandemic last year, she hand sewed masks for frontline workers. And then during the Stop Asian Hate movement, she single-handedly put together 2 Stop Asian Hate rallies herself. And on top of that, the last rally I think that she did was an black and gold like solidarity march, which I thought was incredible. And another thing, one of my other favorite stories, I recently did a talk at a university, and one of the students that brought me on, she told me that she'd been following and reading NextShark ever since like she was in high school. And she was like, yeah, now that I'm a freshman, I recruited some other fellow students, and we're trying to advocate for the first Asian American Studies program on our campus. And that hit me so deep, because like and it kind of made me like look at things from a bird's eye view. And and don't get me wrong, I'm NextShark is a business, right, at its core, but at the same time, like having and experiencing moments like those, it makes me kind of feel, man, like I don't care where NextShark goes. I don't care, like, whether this is going to be a failing business down the line or whatever NextShark stories be. If we can, take part in helping inspire the next generation to do it bigger and better than us, I mean, man, I'll leave this world a grateful man. And I think that ultimately, as human beings, I mean, isn't that what we should do, is to try to leave this world a better place for, our future generations to come?
I love all of those stories, Benny, but I have to tell you, they really make me rethink how I was spending my time in high school. I don't know about you.
Me too. Same here. I get it. They set a high bar, the new generation.
They do, but they are inspiring. They give us so much hope. Congresswoman Meng, I'll come to you next on this. It's not a question that I get to ask elected officials often, but what is it that gives you hope in this space?
I really want to piggyback off of what Benny was just saying. I think this younger generation of leaders in and beyond the Asian American community gives me a lot of hope. They have been the conscience of our country on so many issues, including this. It was really young people, young Asians who participated in Black Lives Matters protests and who came home and had difficult conversations with their family members about why they were there. Young people who were not Asian, who participated and who set up Stop Asian Hate rallies across this country. And they've really brought us together. And, it also reminds me of the work that my generation, that we have not done. And we are now, being guided in so many ways by our young generation. And they also, I remember one activist at a rally said that the answer to racism is never more racism, it's solidarity. And I think that's one of the best things that has come out of this past year and a half, where we have strengthened and in some cases built new coalitions. And that's something, whether it's within our own community or with other communities, that we have not done a good enough job at in the past. And so I hope that we can continue to find more opportunities way beyond just this year and last year to have different communities come together and work together to root out these types of inequities and discrimination. That really gives me a lot of hope. And, you know, one thing I want to add is that it's important for us not just to call out racism that's hurled at our communities, but also to call out racism that exists within our own communities too. I think that many of us are in a unique position to do that. And this is a conversation that I hope it doesn't necessarily make me popular, but I do think that it is something that's necessary to have us be able to make progress and go forward. You know, we've seen in our own ethnic media, for example, I noticed with my limited Chinese reading skills that when a perpetrator is Black or Hispanic, their race and color of their skin is always included. And that just has a detrimental impact on the stereotypes that might already exist within our community and within our society. And so it's being able to work on issues like that and being able to work together and alongside other communities that gives me a lot of hope.
Such an important issue. I thank you for raising that as well. Sonal, Shah, I'll give you the last word here, not just on the hope, on what it is that keeps you going on this mission, but also if you want to speak sort of generally to the leaders here on this panel and out there in the rest of the country that TAAF is now going to be working to support.
Well, first of all, Amna, thank you for hosting this conversation. You're such an awesome moderator, and it's I see why MSNBC and NBC have now added you, because you're an incredible leader. And it's also great, just to be fair, as a South Asian woman and as an Asian American woman, to see another Asian American in those positions. So really, thank you for everything you're doing and for your leadership. So I'm gonna just end with hope, but also like what we have the opportunity to do. What is hopeful to me is watching Tu and watching Joanne in their communities on a daily basis. Even when it's hard, they get up in the morning. Even when it's hard, they work hard. Even when there's not enough resources, they do things. The fact that our community has community members that are constantly doing this, and we all know them, they're in our families, they're in our communities, is important, and recognizing that the work that they do. It's too easy to take this and make this an intellectual debate. Are they doing it well enough? Are they counting the metrics? Are they doing all of those things? But to recognize that people are getting up every morning thinking about how to serve their community, that level of service is incredible and should be honored, and honored to be a part of it with them and to recognize their work. To recognize representatives like Grace Meng, who have led the efforts to create a bipartisan bill on anti-Asian hate. Like, that is not an easy thing to do today, to do anything bipartisan. And the fact that she took that leadership and did that and has built a community that is in support, that's incredible. And I think too often we think about these bills and it's like, oh, it just got passed, let's move on. But the fact is, like, she had to build that community and to get a bipartisan group of senators and congressmen and women to do this, that, you know, gives a lot of hope. And Benny, for the work that he's been doing at NextShark, right? When stories weren't being told, NextShark has been telling the stories. To celebrate the community and also to tell us what's working and not working is also important. And what NextShark has been doing is incredible. And I'm so grateful that they are doing that, the work that they are doing. What we have the opportunity to do is write the script. What is the Asian American community? What do we want people to think about us? Not what is written about us, but what do we want them to think about us? And I think what we are is this moment in time today that we get to write that script. We get to decide what's written about the AAPI communities. We get to come together and have this conversation. This next gen, frankly, is leading the way. And what we all need to do is figure out what they're doing and just support them and make it happen, because they are not looking at Chinese American, Indian American, Pakistani American, Korean American, Vietnamese American. They are looking at AAPI and they're like, we can do this differently. They are in solidarity with Black and Brown communities. And we need to learn from them, and we need to support them, and we need to give them the runway to do that. That's what I see TAAF doing, is our ability to be able to bring people together, but to give the next generation the ability to run and make this work, because what they need is fuel to the work that they're doing. What we have the ability is to offer that fuel. But I'm so grateful for every single person and the leadership that each and every single person here is taking to make sure we come together as a community. And I just want to say thank you to Grace Meng for the work and for her willingness to stand up and talk about how we need to work in solidarity, because this is not an easy comment, an easy thing to talk about in our communities. And I give her just gratefulness for everything that she's doing. So Amna, thank you for everything you're doing, and thank you to everyone else here.
Thank you so much for that and for your kind words. You're absolutely right. There's some tough conversations and some tough work ahead. I am so grateful to have been a part of this conversation. And thank you to each and every one of you for your leadership in this space and for taking the time to be a part of this conversation today. So my thanks to Sonal Shah, president of the Asian American Foundation, to Quach, the incoming president of Oakland's Asian Health Services, Joanne Yu, executive director of the Asian American Federation, Benny Liu, founder and CEO of NextShark, and New York Congresswoman Grace Meng. Thank you so much to all of you.
The thing I realize about my community is how strong and resilient we are.
For our elders.
For our neighbors.
For us.
We must end this cycle of hate
to create belonging.
Our community deserves more
than thoughts and prayers.
It's time for all 23 million of us to be heard.
That is why TAAF is launching a national network of visibility
and support.
The TAAF National Action Centers.
The solutions are already
in our community.
Let's show the world how we overcome hate
with hope.
I don't need no saving. I'm bringing the light. I'm filling my cup until it's up and over.